So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn. I'm Tony Ross, Director of Communications at Provalis Research. Before I introduce our presenters today, I want to reach out to you in the audience. We are working on setting up more Lunch and Learns for this spring, but I want to direct an appeal directly to you. If you have an instructive way to use our software in a current or a past project or a paper, contact me at my email, tony.ross@provalisresearch.com. It's also it's there in the email that you got for the link for this presentation. I will also, sorry not to clog up your email, but I will also be sending all of you a follow-up email explaining the process for the Lunch and Learn, how it works, how you can get involved. So please think about it. The title of today's presentation is What Can We Learn from 100 Novels? A Text Analytics Dictionary Approach. Abby Jones and Martin Glisserman are our presenters. Abby has 10+ years of experience with QDA Minor and WordStat. Her expertise includes design and analysis combined with teaching research methods at 4 universities to offer customized research services. Abby offers consulting, research design, and training services through her company, AJ Research. You can contact Abby through the training section on our website. All her contact information is there. She will also take your already obtained information, such as focus group responses, news coverage, or large documents, and return a professionally written research report to you. Martin has been a professor of English at Rutgers University since 1971. He is also a psychoanalyst in private practice. He was editor-in-chief of American Imago, Psychoanalysis and Culture from 1987 to 2002. The courses he teaches include literature and psychology, digital literary studies, and introduction to graphic novels, as well as seminars in Virginia Woolf, Ralph Ellison, and Alison Bechdel. His book, Psychoanalysis, Language and the Body of Text, 1996, focused on syntax in a select group of novels and demonstrated how dynamic and meaningful the seemingly abstract patterns of syntax are. His second book is Graphic Criticism, Semantics, Neurology, and Cultural Transmission, a study of 100 classic Anglophone novels. Its focus is on the distribution of semantic networks and what they reveal about how culture is transmitted by being encoded in text. That project is currently being expanded to 500 novels. At the end of the presentation, if you wish to ask questions, please send them to us through the chat feature in the upper right corner of your screen. We'll take as many as time allows. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Martin and Abby.
Good afternoon. Since it's now afternoon, I'm going to share my screen with you and move on to my presentation. So this talk will illustrate a journey of discovery about the semantic networks of 100 novels written in English between 1719 and 1997. The journey began before the era of consumer computing systems, digital text, and text analysis software, and it evolved with those systems and tools. It came to fruition with Provalis's software for analyzing texts by building dictionaries that could then search texts and yield data that in turn can be made into visual displays. The analysis from the data and the displays in turn reveal patterns of semantic distribution, which in turn helps demonstrate how cultural artifacts encode and transmit information. The intelligence of Provalis software helped me see a larger intelligence embedded in us all. So what I've learned from 100 novels is something about how the human brain works to encode information inside narratives that provides a schema for another human brain to decode and re-encode. So for example, we all learn syntax of the language of the people who raise us. They don't teach it to us, and we don't attend school to learn it. Rather, our brains learn it. Linguists from the 1950s on have been trying to figure out the rules used to form syntax, and they haven't broken the code yet. But every child can learn the rules and replicate them. I'm suggesting the same thing happens with learning to write a novel. The novels embed rules and teach us the rules. The stories of the novels are like a benign Trojan horse that carries within it instructions for reproducing more stories. As with any physical project, painting a room, sewing a shirt, or making dinner, preparation is key. And when data mining text, preparation is making a dictionary, and actually a web of dictionaries. One element of pre-preparation to making a dictionary involves knowing something about how words work. Words are defined by other words. They have relationships with other words. They have horizontal relationships, such as synonyms and antonyms. That is, each word has a constellation of relatives and a constellation of antagonists. Words also have hierarchical or vertical relationships. So a homonym is a word that names a whole item, say an automobile. And there is a corresponding aspect called a meronym, which is the parts thereof. There is also a hyponym category, which is a class word, say vehicle, and a hypernym would be a word as an example or a type of that higher word class. So for vehicle, that would be automobile, Jeep, truck, and so forth. This is to say that words come with semantic frames, things that are like or unlike, things that are units or parts of units or types of. And often a single word can be in more than one position in different times. So words come to mean in relation to other words. Each word is somewhat unique as it suggests a difference that makes a difference. And like human beings, words are separate and related. This project is about semantic families, words that are connected with one another in forming a kind of semantic pixelation in a novel. So whatever narrative is doing as it moves forward, it's at the same time semantically pixelating that novel. In other words, every time a character shows up, they are doing something, saying something, thinking something. And all those some things build into an image painted by semantic elements. To make this concrete, we'll look at an illustration of a word cloud. This one is a word cloud made, word clouds, as you probably know, rank words from the highest use to the lower uses by font size. So Edna, as the key character in this novel, is the biggest on the font size. The Awakening by Kate Chopin is a late 19th century novel. So when we're working on a project involving words, we're in a soup like this. And we need another kind of element to make sense out of this word cloud. It provides us with raw data, but it's meaningless without a conceptual frame. To make a dictionary, we need concepts to organize the words. In the case of this Wordle, we can see it has more potential information than merely which words are most dominant in the primitive sense of having more mentions. The Wordle houses multiple semantic families. So we can find proper names. We can find named parts of the body and actions of the body. We can see cognitive, linguistic, affective, and perceptual words. We can find elements of the built world. We can find elements of what we call the constructed world, that is the world that we make up, like time and qualities and values. And I can put this all into a roadmap showing at the external, at the far branches, all the words that appeared in that word cloud and how they feed into a larger kind of construct, which I'll tell you more about in a little while. So in addition to knowing about words and data and concepts, we need to be our cyber selves. That is, we need to learn and embed software. Like many things in the built world, software extends and increases the power of ourselves. Think about bicycles, automobiles, chainsaws, telephones. They all extend our physical power. In this case, computers and software increases the power of our brains. So driving Provalis can get us to insights much faster than other kinds of vehicles. I'll show you the end result of my own pre-Provalis research state, as well as where I got to be with Provalis, and where I am currently going with it. So this first slide is where I got to on my own using other methodologies. It's a random sample of novels that would have been read in undergraduate or graduate courses in the English departments over the last half of the 20th century. The graphic is the first one that came out of my early research. It represents nouns that name any aspect of the human body. Think of it as Dr. Frankenstein looking for body parts in the form of nouns. Among these works, we will find 120 body parts. These 120 parts can be assembled into 5 sections, which is what you see in front of you. These sections are organized as medical anatomies organize them. At the top, there's the head. Below that, the upper limb, the torso, the lower limb, and what I call systems, which are bones, blood, nerves, secretions and excretions, things that are all around, not just located in one zone. This first diagram raised some questions in my mind. Why were the ratios so similar? And what did it signify that they were? Would one find such distributions among other semantic families in this corpus? So the first place I looked was into the segment of the body that's named, that has the most real estate, the head. And I divided that one into 8 parts: head, mind, face, hair, eye, ear, mouth, nose, neck, and voice. Here too, we find the distribution across time holds steady. Oops, sorry, I'm on 2 computers at once. I didn't have a hypothesis for this yet. I just noted that there were these similarities and wanted to know why that was. I want to go back up a little bit to show you how this process started and got to this point, from which a much larger picture emerges on this trend of fairly even distribution of semantic families. And for that, Provalis made it possible. In the beginning, before it was a project, I was reading Toni Morrison's Beloved, a difficult book. It took me several years, really, to get past the first 2 pages because it's so ominous and dark and filled with absences. But when I finally did get to read it over the course of 2 days, I found it to be the most incredible text I'd ever read, the most beautiful and affecting I'd ever read in my life. It stirred me, and it felt as if it left a physical imprint on me. I wanted to know if there was something in the novel that allowed it to get to me, to leave this physical imprint on me. So my first impulse was to look at how the book showed up, how the body showed up, since the body is an object of inflicted trauma in the novel. So I went through the book, as you can see, and I circled parts of the body. Excuse me. My interest in the body goes back to probably the beginning of life, but I mark it as the display in the Boston Museum of Science called The Transparent Woman. And my first book was called Psychoanalysis, Language, and the Body of the Text. That book was about syntax as a physical bodily motion. So I took the numbers, put the references to all these body parts into groups, and made a pie chart. different than how things finally organize themselves, but basically the same, the head showing up 47% of the time. It was interesting to me in part because it didn't at all speak to my experience of feeling the book. It did show that the head occupied nearly 50% of the named body. But of course, one example tells us very little about anything. So I did another book, and then 10 books, then 25, reading in the same manner, circling things, counting things, putting them into a chart. Sometime around about the 25th book, there were some digital texts that started to show up and some software in the form of a concordance maker called Monoconc, after which I started using AntConc. And I'm sure you're familiar with what a concordance looks like. You put in the text at the upper left-hand corner, you put a search word down below with an asterisk, and it'll show you hot and hots and the like. And up at the top, it will tell you how many hits there are, and you can see other things that this software will do for you, including collocates. With the concordancer, I managed to get to 100 novels, which is to say that I checked out the 120-word dictionary that I made based on references I circled. So I went through every single 100 novels 120 times to do this. All this took me, and I compiled all the data into a Microsoft Access database. As you might imagine, this took me years. After all, I have a full-time job as an English professor. I have a psychoanalytic practice. I was doing editorial work, participating in faculty governance, and living in the world as a father, husband, dog father, and so forth. I was doing this work out of curiosity. It just got to me, and I just kept going with it when I had time to be obsessive. I did begin to give conference papers, both on the chronological narratives of distribution of semantic zones, but also on various parts of the body, like hands and skin. So one such thing I did was on skin. And it shows that skin, you can see on the left-hand side, occupies a very, very small piece of real estate in the novel. But in the 20th century, especially in the later part of the 20th century, it starts showing up a lot. And I believe, beginning with Quicksand, it's because African-American novels start showing up. So there's conference papers on skin, a diagram, a map of all the things. When I look at skin in many novels, these are some of the things that skin does in a novel, or how it shows up as how it's marked. Is it cold or warm? Is it tasty? Is it salty? Is it aesthetic? Is it old? Is it young? All kinds of attributes. And so that allows, that map is the result of looking at skin in all kinds of novels. Here's skin in George Orwell's novel. I don't know if you know or remember it, but his skin is roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades because of the situation that they live in, and he's got itching things on his ankle and so forth. And his skin in Emma, where blushing shows up many times for many characters, and the quality of the blush, that is to say, what people blush about, tells us a lot about their character. In any case, that the work allowed me to see a span of texts over time, but also allowed me to hone in on individual texts to see what were they doing with this particular item. So when I reached 100, the emerging pattern became the kernel around which my bigger project actually began. Once I had done the body, and even while working on it, I began to wonder about the rest of the semantic families. That is, in addition to the names of the body, what were the words that described what the body does, what it thinks, what it feels? And what about the word worlds around the individual's body? So building a dictionary for body parts was fairly straightforward. I know enough about human anatomy to recognize a word that refers to it. But for other matters, I'd need to see what others had done. And two sources were most helpful in formulating a conceptual set. One is a concept dictionary of English, written by a man named Julius Lafell. And he had 118 categorical groups. His work is fine-grained, empirically derived, and actually tested. His opening observation is that a conceptual dictionary is a collection of words of a language organized to show the kinds of content represented in the words. The conceptual dictionary was helpful down the road, but it offered no conceptual frame into which the 118 categories fit. There was no hierarchy or matrix. This is how it works. There are concepts that he formulated. And you can see there, some of them are like body or bug or actual words, and some of them are just kind of abbreviated things. So there are the categories. And then there is an actual alphabetic list of words where next to them, we find the concept names. And then the reader can go to the concept part of the dictionary and find words that are akin to it. So for example, in the category frame, there's one category called law. So we can go to the category dictionary. Here you see law, and below it are all the words connected to law. And sometimes those words are obviously connected to other categories. There were other such enterprises of this sort, mostly by anthropological linguists, but they had the same problem. There was no matrix of connections. The breakthrough for me came with the historical Thesaurus of the Oxford English Dictionary, published in 2008. This is the very beginning of that dictionary. You can see it offers 3 overarching categories and 39 subcategories. And each of these subcategories leads to more subcategories and so forth. I wanted a slightly different matrix, though I very much appreciated the work and relied on it for many of the things I did. So for example, I wanted to see the natural world as separate from the built world, where here it's all packed into the external world. Because in a novel, it's important to see things that are built and things that are natural, because they're metaphoric. They form an important part of the texture of the text. I also wanted to see the body and the mind in the same semantic place. I didn't want a dualistic framework. So I developed a 4-part model. The human body being, that is everything about the individual human being, the natural world, the built world, and the social world. What I'm pointing out is that at some point, when one begins to build a dictionary to search texts, one needs a conceptual framework. In the case of the body work, I knew I wanted to see the names of the body, and once I found them, all 120, I needed to find superordinate categories. Otherwise, it would be impossible to see to see anything. If you were looking at 120 individual words and 100 novels on a spreadsheet, you can't really see anything. The subcategories arose from the big pool of body names and was aided by medical anatomies. On my first go-round with Provalis in 2012, the only thing I was really doing with the software was building a set of dictionaries around the categorical groups I had constructed. I wasn't using the software in a very complex way, but rather using it to store information, categories and words that I was finding through other sources. The Categorical Dictionary, a project called WordNet, the OED Historical Thesaurus. What Provalis could do was search for these dictionary words and spit out data that I could put into an Excel spreadsheet and make charts with. Where I had been using a concordance software, which meant looking at every item and every text, Provalis let me find everything all at once. There were items for which Provalis could have been helpful, in particular names of characters and places were things I needed to search each book for by using the feature of AntConc called word list, where I would just go skimming through and pick up names and places. What I ended up being able to see after building 4 overarching category dictionaries and 15 subcategories were patterns that provided me with an idea that these patterns didn't emerge by accident, nor was there a handbook that writers used to distribute semantic families. Rather, the patterns spoke to encoded data. Here's what the 4 novel looks like. I got to move this around so you can see it a little better. Okay. This is the raw universe, the human body, the constructed world, and the built world. And what this tells us in a simple way is that novels are about the interaction of human beings in the social universe. It's not like a major insight, but to see data that tells us that this is indeed what the novel is about is pretty amazing, I think. And when you get down to the next graphic, which divides those 4 parts into 15 parts, we can see many different aspects of the novel. This little purple line here is the one part of the work that I did on my own before Provalis. Provalis let me see all the rest of these parts. So that's pretty much where we are. Having completed a manuscript called Graphic Criticism, I decided to start a web-based project using 500 novels, and sometime maybe 1,000. This time around, however, I wanted to use Provalis in a more thoroughgoing manner, and I hired Dr. Abby Jones to teach me the finer points about this incredibly robust software, so I could build a dictionary, get more nuanced information and more data from more texts. So from here, I'm inviting Dr. Jones to show you some of the processes used to extract data from text to build complex dictionaries, once you know something about what you are categorically looking for. Abby, it's all yours.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Yes. Martin, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming today. When Martin and I first met, he explained the process he had taken with his 100 novels. So he went through basically what he just went through with you guys, with me. Ironic, kind of funny, Beloved was also a very big book in my own life. I read it in high school and in college. So I understood the power of the book, which was a great place for us to start. He explained the way he used Provalis in a largely deductive way, as he talked about, in cooperation with other tools he had at his disposal. He talked about data, and I knew we were going to be instant friends when he used words awesome and cool to describe data. Now, having used Provalis myself since around 2009, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure where in the process I started. The first thing I knew was how much the program had advanced in such wonderful ways. And I instantly started to think about all the ways it could assist him. I remember our first conversation and trying to actually not say everything as it came to my head, because I didn't want to scare him off. I have a tendency to get all excited about Provalis and move ahead and give people 1,000 ideas, and then they get a little nervous. What I did speak about was how he could absolutely use the inductive tools in WordStat to build a rich and highly valid dictionary to examine the books, and then move on to even marry that with QDA and code books. And that was a direction we were going in. I do fully admit that in our first conversation, Martin, with all his amazing knowledge of linguistics and English, and me with my own obsession with research and how it works, we weren't always on the same page, but we were definitely going in the same direction, which was very exciting. So for the first thing we did was to import the 500 books Martin wanted to examine into the program. We then ran a frequency on the data without a set dictionary to see what was there. I actually do this step with almost any project I'm working on with Provalis. It lets you truly see the program read the materials for you. And importantly, and I did a session back in November about this, it helps you remove so many of your assumptions that might get in your own way while you're researching. This is one of the things I actually focus on a lot in my own work and in my consulting with AJ Research, is to how to remove your own preconceived notions and your own assumptions. Here you can see in the slide, right, the frequency chart. Now, I won't lie to you, this is a very large amount of data, 500 books. So there are 118,000, right, at the top there with Mr. That's a lot of data. And so we were always and consistently talking about how to narrow things down, how to help Martin focus on the project, and how to take this enormously large amount of data. And I know I just heard Martin say 1,000 books. I'm not sure he'd ever said those words to me, but someday maybe 1,000 books. Next, we used the original dictionary from the 100 project. So the dictionary that Martin had built in the way he described it to you on the 500 books to see how that would compare. Right? So here you see, if you remember back to the data that Martin showed you, there are similarities, there were differences. We spent a lot of time looking at this and trying to see how what we had with the 500 now fit into what he already had created, and how then from there we were going to grow that. So from here, Martin went to work, and I give him all the credit. He really did spend a lot of time working on this. As you can hear from his presentation, he's a pretty determined guy. He added many of the words that were found in the 500 sample to the dictionary. He reworked the dictionary. He did a lot of dragging and dropping and moving things around, right, to create a dictionary that we're now using, that we're really comfortable with. So I cannot stress that in a process like this, that was the most important step for us, was Martin going off and creating a very accurate dictionary. And yeah, it's painful, and yeah, it takes time, and it's not quick, but for you to have valid findings, and even interesting valid findings, this is a key step in the process. Without this step, everything else is moot because the data is not correct, or it's not interesting, or it's not understandable. So creating a correct and accurate dictionary is, I can't stress enough, very, very important. A key component, though, for Martin in this work was that he added many of the words, right, was that he was using the named entities component of Provalis. He talked about his process, right, and how he had found names, and the long kind of laborious process of how he found names in the past, right? And now here was this named entity process he could go through to make sure he had captured this type of information in his 500 project. So it really did change how we approached it. It really did change what we found and the accuracy of it. In the middle of this page that I'm showing you now, you can see the name Emma, which Martin had already mentioned in association with blushing. Emma is Jane Austen's book, among other books that obviously have the name Emma in them. Emma is a book that Martin and I are in constant debate about, but you can see here. Now, as Martin and I are still in the middle of this project, and boy are we, there are still several tools in Provalis we'll be using to evaluate the data and produce much more nuanced findings than was possible 10 years ago. So Martin showed you his few charts and they're amazing. And the first time he showed them to me, I remember being a little overwhelmed and incredibly impressed with what he had accomplished. But we want to use the tools that are now at our disposal. Thanks to Normand and Tony and Lita and those guys. This includes using the rules creation, right, in the dictionary. Here you can see one possibility just on the screen, right, would be to look at how the words and especially the categories relate to each other. So Martin talked about attributes. That's one way to relate words, right? Names and attributes and pronouns and attributes to look at how we are talking about objects and the human body, right? But here also you can see I could create a rule that would find paragraphs where character names are associated with systems of the body, which Martin already explained, things like blood and all of that, right? Then I could do this with the dictionary rule. I'm not going to get too deep into this. I have presentations on it, and I know there are other presentations on it on the Provalis website. But I wanted to show you some possibilities. We're also going to use tools like proximity plotting and topic modeling to dig even deeper into the data. So again, having this great dictionary that we built, that Martin built, I'm not going to take credit here, that Martin built, allows us to do so many other research tools and feel comfortable that we know what we're doing is accurate, valid, as I say in my research class. Now, the final piece I want to speak about is building a very accurate and well thought out dictionary can also allow you to build a valid and strong code book, what I call back, but in QDA. I'm not going to go through the process here today again. We will run out of time quickly. But I believe one of my older lunch and learns is still on the Provalis site, and it's definitely on my own site, ajresearch.net, that shows you the process you can go through to take your dictionary and turn it into a code book. It's pretty easy. I actually also am in the process of writing a descriptive memo about how to go through this process. And that will be part of my services that I will be offering. But the important thing to know right now is that you can go from a carefully and inductively created dictionary like this and be sure, right, to look at the body named categories there you see. Okay, so be careful. Make sure you see those body names to a QDA codebook like this. And you see them there. So we went from WordStat back into QDA or into QDA. I use QDA first, so I always use that back phrase. It's like, you know, Midwesterners say back east. Back in QDA. And here you can see the body name category right there in the code book, and under it are all the subcategories. The great part, right, is always that if you right click, as you can do almost anywhere in Provalis, which is one of the things I love most about Provalis, you can see the segments are coded. Again, this happens in the process over at WordStat that is fairly easy to understand, and I'm happy to help people with. There are lots of reasons to transform your WordStat dictionary into QDA codes. One is that it saves you from running the frequencies over and over again. When the data set is this big, you really don't want to do this. A second reason, at least for me, is that I find it much easier to work with analyzing the data, particularly in relation to variables and such in QDA. The ability to make clear charts that show off your work is just great. There are other reasons, but this one I think is the most important, at least to me, is that I always love taking my data back into QDA to create charts, to relate it, to do searches. You can also use the computer learning tools back here in QDA. So I almost always take my WordStat dictionaries and pull them back into QDA. So again, I'm not going to do a whole spiel on creating charts. This is a whole other lesson. But here you can see I'm going to examine my coding in terms of how they appeared in each century, which is a variable that we added to the data. So we left off the 1600s because we only had one book in that period, but we had the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s. And so after I went through the charting process, I had this data to offer Martin, and we worked together on it. So you can see that the head is consistently the most talked about in the data, and things like lower limb are much smaller. But I know for Martin, it's the consistency part that he was quite interested in. I admit, still been learning about all of this, the literature part of our project. And I love that about being a consultant. I get to learn always about new areas of study, because I'm the computer person. And again, Martin is the literature and English person, and he's an expert at it. If you go look him up, he's considered an expert in his field. But I feel like this is going through this process with the 500 books has shown us that what he found with 100 and using other processes, we found pretty consistently with the 500. But now we're going to do a much deeper investigation using other tools such as rules, proximity charts, charts like this. We're going to do some topic modeling, and I'm looking really forward to seeing what we find, and maybe we'll come back and do another presentation. Okay, I'm going to throw it back to Martin to let him finish up. Martin?
Hello, I just have one last piece to share. So let me share my screen. And what I want to share is this is, let me bump this up a little bit. This is the 500. This is an expanded version of what Abby just showed you in a compact manner. This is all 500 novels. Let me just bump it up enough so you can see some of the titles and share with you just this longitudinal trip through 500 novels and 61 million words. We use the very same dictionary for the 120 body parts, and this is the way it looks. I just find it delightfully amazing that anything could do this for me. So I think that I just want to thank you for being here. Certainly, I know that Tony is on board. If you have questions for either of us, happy to chat some more, and much obliged for being here. Thank you.
Thank you
for
very
being here.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Martin. Okay, if you have questions, please use the chat feature. We have one good comment. That's so cool. So on your last slide there, Martin.
Yeah.
If you have
Martin says that a lot too.
If you have questions, please use the chat feature. Martin, could you repeat the author title of the Concept Dictionary?
Yes, certainly.
And is it still relevant or useful today?
I think it is. I think it's a lot of fun. His name is Laffel, Laffal, and it's called the Concept Dictionary. Let me see if I have it on hand.
Actually, Norma just put it on in the chat. Julius Laffel.
I don't see it.
He took his headphones off. I'm not sure I can hear you.
Just called the Concept Dictionary of English.
Okay.
Julius Laffel. And certainly if you can't, I mean, it's long out of print. If you can't find it and you're not sure of the exact title, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to give you an exact citation.
Okay. The Concept Dictionary of English, published in the 60s, according to
yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. Did you use at all the Colin Martindale's The Regressive Imagery Dictionary? Did you play with that at all?
No, in fact, this is the first I've heard of it.
Okay. you might want, all right. Well, anyway, I can send you an email back on it later.
Thank you.
Okay, Lawrence, all right, unmute yourself and I'll make an exception this time to ask a question that takes 30 seconds of explanation. Can you unmute?
Hi, Laurie here. Basically, the question is, what did you treat as a chunk of text for analysis? And the reason I ask this, we had one study where the coding was done by 3 different people, and after one set of coding, we had only 45% agreement between the coders, and the coding was on sentiment, where you could say a sentiment of a statement, positive, negative, neutral, or mixed. And when we found that there was this 45% only agreement, we looked into it and we found that the reason was that often statements of the kind A but not B. My previous pregnancy was terrible, but this one was wonderful. The consultant's knowledge was superb, but his personality was rubbish. That sort of thing, which he had coded as a single item and therefore had given the label mixed. I'd coded it as 2 separate things, previous pregnancy, current pregnancy, so I'd coded them as positive and negative. Is there any guidance on that?
I think I like yourself, I think I look at everything and put it into the mix. And then when I'm looking at individual texts, start separating ideas out about it. I'm really looking in the dictionary at individual items, not at anything larger than that.
I have also worked on projects where coding, I've been part of a team. I think Norman knows this historic story at GW of a project that the team had a lot of trouble agreeing upon what the codes were. We went backwards and almost started the project again. And we let one person do a large amount of coding and then teach us what they were doing and how they were looking at, in your case, look at it in 2 different ways. So instead of trying to have everybody separately take their own approaches and then try to come together, we came together and then went and did the coding and found that was a much better process. And it also, it did involve academics swallowing their egos, which isn't always easy, but it did involve that.
I mentioned also that in both the Concept Dictionary and the Historical Thesaurus, in the introductory materials for both of them, there is conversation about this very matter, of how they arrived at the conclusions that they arrived at. So that might be of use.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Lawrence. In developing your dictionary, let's do this one. Going separately and then coming together and even doing it repeatedly is great for establishing a better inter-observer agreement while coding. Okay, that's a comment from Erica. Martin, in developing your dictionary, do you think it's useful for other researchers, or is it mainly designed for psychological analysis?
I guess it would depend upon what it is you're researching. Certainly for reading novels and probably poems or dramas, I think it would be a very useful way to start looking at things. Looking at legal briefs, well, even there, you need to have some framework for developing a dictionary. So it has some relevance to other kinds of research, I would imagine, so including social research. Looking at the British corpus, which involves people's just daily speech and so forth and so on. But I guess it really depends upon what are you looking for. I started this process really not looking for anything. So it just sort of emerged as I started poking around more and more.
Okay, thank you. Also, in building the dictionary or in working through the dictionary using WordStat, well, this could be to either Abby or Martin or both of you. Were there particular tools or aspects that you found more helpful than others? I'm thinking phrase extraction, for example, or.
We used frequency and the named entities. That was the kind of the two big tools that we used to create the dictionary. I'm going and kind of connecting to what Martin just talked about. For me, I'm a big believer in inductive research, and I know Martin's heard me talk about this a lot this past few weeks while we've been working together. But this has definitely been the best marriage I've seen of using pre-created, concordance and things like that within the inductive tools that Provalis offers you. So for me, this has been a lesson too on that, inductive research is great. And I'm always about inductive and creating categories and letting the computer speak for itself, but also that there are tools out there you can look towards to help you in building a great dictionary.
What about the Thesaurus in WordStat? Did you use that?
We haven't yet. We've talked about using it as we move forward.
I did use some of it when I made the first go through in Provalis, and it was helpful.
Okay. Are there any more questions out there? Lawrence, do you have another question? No. Oh, here we go. Oh, go ahead, Lawrence. I beg your pardon.
I'd say normally thousands, but on this occasion, none. Thank you.
Okay. Are you giving any thought to trying to code your categories, especially body-oriented ones, separately for the protagonist and other characters?
Oh, nice.
Wouldn't such a distinction be essential for ultimately deriving meaning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I do deep dives, I do make those separations. For example, the one I pulled up about blushing and Emma, each of those characters blushes for different reasons. So there's a very nice psychological component to the blush. So separating out those matters is very important. Separating out other matters related to skin is essential in a book like Blind Men with a Pistol, an African-American novel. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's certainly as I go into individual pieces, the separation becomes imperative and fascinating.
How about gender as well?
We have started. I think we made that into a variable. At some point, we will investigate race, gender, geography. Time.
I think he's talking about in terms of characters, not in terms of authors.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, not in terms of authors, in terms of characters.
I'll add in here. That's where the rules are going to come in. I mean, that's the exact reason you use the rules, because we'll be able to put, words like blushing, and then we'll be able to put the category of named characters, and we'll be able to literally have, and then we can extract keyword and keywords. Keyword in context, or keyword, what are the two ones? Tony, there's keyword in context and there's other keywords. And we'll be able to look at those paragraphs very specifically. So we'll be able to see Emma's blushing for one reason, and somebody else, Charlotte, is blushing for another. And so the rules are really going to play a huge part in our deeper dive.
Okay. How do you solve the problem of literal and metaphorical use of words, concepts, idiomatic use?
We're still working on it.
Well, I'll tell you one example of such a problem, the problem of hand, where there are those idiomatic phrases on the one hand, on the other hand. And I lean for that particular issue on some neurological research that indicates that we have kind of dictionaries in mind in our brains, and that we scroll through them, as it were, when we come into a particular usage of them. So I count literally hand, however it shows up, whether it's an animal or a vegetable or a metaphor, whatever it is, I count it as hand, because I think that it registers that way.
Okay, thank you. Another question, sort of similar question. Do you try to distinguish between contexts? So for example, a broken heart figurative versus shot in the heart, the organ? And are there challenges doing that?
I do not tend to make those contradistinctions except when I end up looking at a novel like Beloved. In Beloved, in fact, all the hats are figurative, I would say, but it's sort of almost hard to contradistinguish sometimes whether the hat is the organ or partly because what we know from physiology is that when trauma strikes, the hat actually changes shape. That we talk about a broken heart, and it's actually not a metaphor. It's actually a physiological fact. So in Beloved, one of the fascinating things about that novel is that many of the characters have their own heart narratives. So there's one character whose name is Baby Suggs. And when she is freed, she discovers her heart. She feels it beating. And then she uses her heart she opens her heart to the community. And then at later point, her heart is broken. So there's a whole story about her heart, and likewise with other characters. So I don't tend, at least both in heart and hand, I tend not to make those contradistinctions, but they do show up as you look at individual works and try to understand the meaning thereof.
Okay, thank you. Have you looked at more closely at, or yet perhaps, have you looked more closely at changes over time to occurrences of the categories? Have any categories shown significant changes over the decades of novels? I hypothesize this could show cultural shifts, literary shifts of authors over the years, and our societal focus. For example, occurrences of mind/body connection increases over time.
Actually, mind/body decreases over time. And I think it's because we have a more sophisticated way of talking about mental activity without having to name the mind. And one of the other things that increases over time is hair, HAIR. It increases over time because I think sexuality is more allowable later in time than it is. So yeah, you look, and skin, as I think I showed, shifts too. So yeah, there are shifts in individual categories. And yet the profile, when you look at the profile of all of it, there's enough similarity because the differences in these things are relatively minor.
Okay. We have just a second. I've got one more new. Okay. Sorry. It's just fascinating. Thank you in terms of response to your answer. Thank you. That seems like the questions that we have for now. If Abby, Martin, do you have any sort of last wrap up comments?
No, I'm really amazingly happy to have been here to share this work. I didn't think anybody but my, literary counterparts in England and Japan would be interested. So thanks so much for showing up and listening.
And I'd like to end by saying, I've worked with Provalis and Nerman for a long time. This project, I think, shows that there's such a wide berth of researchers out there who can benefit from using tools like this. I think if anybody had told me that this was, where I was going with work right now, and the kind of professor who would contact me, I would have said, really? And so I think it's great because it opens our minds up to looking at research in a wider way. And I would encourage you to talk to your colleagues and other, if you're in a certain department, talk to your colleagues in other departments and encourage them to think about this kind of content and semantic analysis and to do it in a more concise, slightly less painful way.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. You can contact either Martin or Abby. On the screen now is their contact information. If for some reason you can't, you can always contact me and I can send it to you. Lawrence, I'm going to give you a shout out here. I think you should be doing a presentation on this lunch and learn. I'm going to follow up with you. You always have such great questions. I bet you've got, and you talk about really interesting research. I'll bet you've got a lot to share. So
no pressure there, Tony.
No, none whatsoever. And Lawrence, you're the only person I've ever allowed to speak. So that's even another reason why you should present. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I will be sending you an email asking if you would like to participate in our Lunch and Learns. Regardless, we hope to have another one in the next couple of weeks. Take a look on our email. Take a look at your email, because we send it to you through email, and also on our website, and also on our Twitter account. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating. I think this was a great presentation. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Abby. And look forward to seeing you, everybody, in the next few weeks. And as I said, there is a recording of this that will be put up on the website probably within the next week. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.